When I planted the garden obelisk in the spring of this year, I said I'd show you how I created these architectural raised beds from leftover stone in the garden. We garden on stone, we only have a few inches of topsoil at best, and everything we plant we need to plant with a rock breaker. So we constantly have piles of stone around the garden and a little bit of builder's rubble. So whenever I want to build one of these walls, I collect my stones from various piles around the garden. Now the new bed I'm creating here was the last bed of a series of 5, and I needed to keep the lines the same. So I set this out with my string. We find the previous beds that we made a few years ago really keep down the weeds, and add layers of organic matter, mostly homemade compost, to the beds year upon year. The formwork in which we lay our concrete and stones is actually made of some old laminate floor, just reinforced with a little bit of timber that we had lying around. I place the formwork in the hole and ensure it's level, and then just screw it together. I make the bed about 8 inch wide, which is actually just the width of one of the floorboards. The golden rule here when screwing these together is to ensure that you can actually get the screws back out once the concrete is set. I usually pour no more than about 4 or 5 feet at a time, and here is one of my finished moulds ready for the pour. For the concrete mix I use my mixer, and I use a mix of 3 parts of aggregate to 2 parts sand and 1 part cement. And I mix it quite loose at first. I find this way it actually seeps down into the voids and fills them all out, creating a barrier that the roots of the weeds cannot penetrate. I try and create the bottom inch or so of the mix as just full concrete, and sometimes I put some reinforcement bar in if I have some, and then it's just a case of stacking all the stones in or any other bits and pieces that you may have, and then just keep filling up the concrete around it until the mould is actually really full to the top. It actually turns into a little bit of a competition with my wife to see who can form the best section of wall once the mould is removed. Some of the sections we keep quite smooth on the top. We find it's nice to sit on as you're weeding the beds, and in other areas we just leave stones poking out just as a feature. And once the mould is full, we usually just cover it over with some polythene to stop it drying out too quickly. Now the interesting thing is, when do you release the mould? Sometimes on a hot day we'll just keep the mould on for maybe 5 or 6 hours, or sometimes overnight. It's interesting to see how temperature and time changes the workability after the mould has been released. And we usually just brush it with a wire brush to round over the corners and to make the most of the decorative stone that we have placed at the tops and sides. As we have a symmetrical pattern in this set of beds, I just need to make sure that each bed is consistent with the other. So, under the supervision of Gracie, I set out the other corner to the correct width, employing the same method of making the mould as before. And then it's just a case of following the same principle. Make the mould, pour the concrete, remove the mould, and so on until you're all the way round. We find on a really hot summer's day, if you start early, you get 2 moulds made in the day, or if not, just 1 every day. And these beds should last a lifetime, and as they weather and mould, they look even better.